A couple months ago, I put out a video that claimed Tony Stark was always Doctor Doom. It did numbers that I genuinely didn't expect. And it also got some of the most passionate pushback I've ever received on this channel. And the most common one was that Marvel never thought of this. And you know what? You're kind of right. Not about the theory, but about the framing. Because I think the way I told the theory made it sound like Kevin Feige had this specific idea sitting in a drawer since 2008. And that's not what I actually believe. That's not what I meant. What I believe is something more interesting than that. I believe Marvel was handed an impossible problem. A villain who was supposed to carry 2 films suddenly was fired. A fan base that had already checked out. A franchise that needed more than a course correction. And you know what they did? They found the most elegant solution in the history of comic book filmmaking. They didn't plan for Tony Stark as Doctor Doom since 2008. But they realized, sometime after seeing that Kang wasn't working, that Tony already was Doctor Doom. And once you understand what that actually means for Secret Wars, the most famous 4 words in MCU history land completely differently. I am Iron Man. Suddenly, that's no longer just Tony Stark's last words before he snaps his fingers. That's his declaration of identity. And this video is going to show you why. My name is Braden. This is the season 1 finale of my Doomsday Clock series. So let's get into it. So let me tell you what I actually think happened. First off, Doctor Doom was always going to be the Secret Wars villain. God Emperor Doom, finally getting his moment on the biggest stage the franchise has ever built. That was always the plan. Kang was never going to be the God Emperor. Kang was going to be the threat that fractured everything, the villain who proved that the Avengers couldn't handle what was coming alone, who forced the multiverse saga into its darkest chapter, and then Doctor Doom was going to walk through the door that Kang left open and kick his butt. Probably kill him. That was the structure. What losing Jonathan Majors actually did, and I think this gets missed in almost every conversation about this, is give Doom more runway, more story, an entire film built around Victor Von Doom rather than a late film pivot in a Kang movie. Instead of Doom arriving in the 3rd act of Kang Dynasty to end the threat, we get Doomsday, a whole movie dedicated to Victor Von Doom. And Marvel made one more decision that I think is the most creatively interesting thing they've done since Endgame. They looked at the villain who was always going to be there at the end, and they formed an idea about him that had been seen in, 18 years of films waiting to be seen? Robert Downey Jr. is still the most beloved actor in the history of this franchise. The character he played for 11 years is the emotional center of everything Marvel built. And there is a reason why the most dangerous man in the Marvel Universe looks exactly like the man who saved it. They are 2 sides of the same coin. Both geniuses in suits of armor, both with a wound that never fully healed no matter how powerful they became, both with an unstoppable need to control every outcome because the alternative, a world that tries to protect itself without them, is something neither of them can allow. Marvel looked at Doctor Doom and Tony Stark, and they realized that they didn't need to explain why RDJ was playing the villain. The story could explain it. And I mean, the Russo brothers came back. The directors who gave us Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, Endgame, the people who understood better than anyone that the best Marvel movies are built on character first. And they said something in an early interview that changed how I viewed this film, that this story ignited them. And I think about what it would actually take to ignite the people who made Infinity War Endgame. What kind of story would have to land in front of them for that to be the right word? I think it's this one, because what they found, sitting in the middle of a saga that had been fumbling for several years, was the most character-driven thing that they've ever attempted. A story about identity, about what happens when the universe decides you're someone else, about 2 men built from the same material who arrived at completely different destinations. Doom was always coming, but they finally understood the wound he was carrying when he got here. So I want to go back to a specific moment in Endgame. Right after Thanos bombs the Avengers compound, everything is chaos. Tony finds Steve in the rubble, hands him his shield, and says something that I think a lot of us have been talking about. When you mess with time, it tends to mess back. And then he says, "You'll see." Now on the surface, that reads as Tony being Tony. Cryptic, a little smug, a general observation about time travel in the middle of a battle. But sit with those 2 words for a second. He says, "You'll see," directed at Steve, personally, implying that Steve specifically is going to experience time messing back, and that Tony already knows what that experience is going to look like, because Steve goes back. At the end of Endgame, after everything, Steve makes the choice to return to 1945, to live his life with Peggy, to finally have the thing that was taken from him. And I've talked in previous videos about what that choice actually does to the multiverse. Steve Rogers living in a timeline he was never supposed to inhabit for that long. It doesn't just affect his story, it sends ripples. It accelerates the incursion chain that's already collapsing timelines across the multiverse. It may even be part of what gives Doom the knowledge or the motivation that drives everything in Doomsday. Tony is looking at Steve in that moment and telling him directly, your choice has consequences you haven't felt yet. You'll see. Now, how does Tony know that? How does Tony Stark, standing on a pile of rubble with Thanos' army bearing down, know specifically what Steve Rogers is about to go through? Well, what if Loki, sitting on his throne at the end of time, watching every branch of the multiverse, assembling the heroes he needs for what's coming, pulled Tony from that exact moment? Right when the compound explodes, right before Tony finds Steve, Loki reaches through, pulls Tony out, brings him the full picture, Doom, Battleworld, what the multiverse actually is, and what Tony actually is inside of it. Tony goes on the greatest journey of his life, and then Loki returns him right back to this moment. The rubble, Steve looking confused in the wreckage, Tony hands him the shield and speaks from experience. When you mess with time, it tends to mess back. He knows it. He has lived it. And then he walks back into battle with full knowledge of everything that's coming. And guys, what he does with that knowledge, that's what the rest of this video is about. So if you watched the first video in this series, the one that started all of this, you already know the parallels. The armor, Ultron and the Doombots, the dream about Tony having a boy. If you haven't watched it, it's linked below and I genuinely recommend checking it out. The video made the case that Tony is a variant of Victor Von Doom, created by He Who Remains. And I think it made that case well enough that a lot of people felt it. What it couldn't do, what I couldn't have the full picture to do yet, was answer the question underneath the parallel. So what? So they built the same armor. So they made the same unilateral decisions. What does any of that actually mean for what's coming? And I think I can answer that. Because what the rest of this series revealed, the Norns, the Fantastic Four, the manufactured memories, the spell Strange cast, the way Doom used every real wound every person around him was carrying, what all of that shows us is that Victor Von Doom understands Tony Stark in a way that nobody else in this story does. He knows exactly what Tony was carrying for 11 years because he felt it too. The weight of a world that needed protecting. The certainty that he was the only one who could see the threat clearly enough to act on it. The dreams that felt too real to explain that were in fact real because the wall between them was never as solid as it should have been. Dr. Doom didn't just lose his identity to He Who Remains. He watched Tony Stark live his life, make his choices, build his suits, save his world, and then he gave it all away. And I think that, more than anything else, is what Victor Von Doom cannot sit with. He Who Remains stole his life, and the man who lived it chose to die for people who will never know his real name and spent his final act saving a timeline that was manufactured and fake. Victor Von Doom does not understand that. Secret Wars is Victor Von Doom standing across from the man who lived his life and finally asking why he gave it away. Hey guys, real quick before we keep going, I just dropped the Doomsday Prep Kit. The free version has your full MCU watch list, the key players, the Road to Doomsday timeline, and every RDJ tease since he was cast, all in one place, completely free. The link is in the description. And if you want to go deeper, YouTube memberships are now open, where we have the full Doomsday Prep Kit, which is a living document that I constantly update with tons of new pages that aren't seen in the free version, exclusive Discord access, early access to videos, live streams, behind the scenes updates, and everything in between. So the link for that is also in the description. Anyways, let's get back to it. So to understand what Secret Wars is actually about, you have to understand what was done to Victor Von Doom before any of this started. At the absolute end of time, there is a man sitting alone in a citadel, watching over every reality that has ever existed. He Who Remains, the architect of the sacred timeline, the man who ended the multiversal war. He was able to control which version of history was allowed to exist. He controlled everything inside of it. Every hero, every villain, every cosmic event. All of it was curated and engineered to produce exactly the outcome he wanted. And what he wanted was simple. A universe stable enough to last, predictable enough to control, and one where no variant of Kang could ever rise up and tear everything apart again. So he pruned and dispersed everything that threatened that. The Fantastic Four separated. The X-Men separated. Because He Who Remains decided they were too dangerous to allow to exist together. But Dr. Doom was different, because every time He Who Remains tried to erase Victor Von Doom, Victor Von Doom found a way back. He's too smart, he's too powerful, he's too relentless. And He Who Remains knew that better than anyone, so he made a different calculation. He didn't kill Victor Von Doom, he rewrote him, using power that only exists at the absolute end of time. The kind of power that doesn't just change what happens, but changes what was. He Who Remains reached into Victor's life, and he unmade it. The memories of Latveria, the years of mastering magic, the throne, the identity of a man who had looked at a broken multiverse and decided he was the only one qualified to fix it. Gone. And in its place, a story. A billionaire's son, born into privilege instead of forged through struggle. Given every advantage, every resource, every reason to believe the world was fundamentally worth protecting. Howard and Maria Stark didn't just raise a child. They raised an experiment. He Who Remains looked at the most dangerous mind in the history of the multiverse, and he asked one question. What happens if we give Victor Von Doom everything he never had? And up until He Who Remains was killed, it actually worked. Every suit Tony built was Doom's obsession redirected. Every moment, every sleepless night, every anxiety attack, every moment Tony couldn't stop preparing for a threat nobody else could see yet. That was Victor Von Doom bleeding through. Because you can change the memories, you can change the name and the face and the history, but you can't change what someone is at their core. He Who Remains planned for almost everything, but what he didn't plan for was the real Victor Von Doom, the one who was exiled from 616, remembering everything and tracing the outline of a life that was stolen from him, finding the fingerprints, understanding what was done, and deciding that the man who lived his life and gave it away was wrong. So let's talk about how Doomsday ends. But I want to be clear. This is a theory. This is me pulling on threads and following them to where I think they lead. But everything we've built across this series points at the same conclusion. Dr. Doom wins. The plan works, the manipulation holds, the Fantastic Four trusted him, the Avengers followed, Steve carried the guilt Doom handed him the entire film, and by the time anyone sees clearly enough to understand what's actually happening, it's already over. And I think at the end of Doomsday, when it's all over, when the board is set exactly where Victor needed it, Doom removes the mask. And there's a face that this world thought it buried. But it's Victor Von Doom, finally, fully, completely himself, standing in the ruins of the sacred timeline, the fake universe, the lie He Who Remains built. And the heroes who are still standing are looking at a face they recognize, a face they loved, a face they watched die. And it means something completely different now. Because that face was never Tony's. It was always Victor's. He Who Remains took it and used it to protect his timeline. But now Victor has it back. And what he builds with it, what Battleworld actually is, what the God Emperor actually wants, that's where this story actually goes next. Because Secret Wars is Victor Von Doom getting everything he wanted, and then coming face to face with Tony Stark. So Tony Stark arrives on Battleworld, and this is the inversion that I think is the most elegant thing this entire arc has been building toward. In Doomsday, the movie we're about to watch, there is a tension running underneath every single scene with Doctor Doom, especially Doctor Doom and Steve Rogers. We know it's under the mask. The characters don't. We're sitting in the theater watching Victor Von Doom manipulate every person around him, and we know something that they don't, that the face underneath that iron is a face that they buried. That tension is the whole movie, and then Doom wins. Battleworld gets built, and Loki reaches through the timeline and pulls Tony Stark out of the rubble during Endgame just before the moment Tony becomes a memory, and brings him to the other side of the story. And the tension actually flips completely, because on Battleworld, nobody remembers Tony Stark, because Doom erased him. The same way He Who Remains reached into the sacred timeline and unmade Victor Von Doom, replacing him with the billionaire's son from New York. Doom wins and reaches back and removes Tony Stark from the collective memory of Battleworld entirely. The experiment is undone. He Who Remains replaced Doom with Tony. Doom wins and erases Tony completely, and Doom opens his eyes on Battleworld and finds himself in a world that has no idea he ever existed. A world built from his face, his genius, his obsession, his unstoppable need to control every outcome, where the man those qualities belong to has been written out of the story. He is the Ghost now, the most famous hero in the history of the Marvel Universe, the man who said I am Iron Man and saved everything, and nobody on this world knows his name, except for a small resistance group, the people Loki specifically chose and placed on Battleworld before Doom could reach them. People who, if they are from 616, know exactly who Tony Stark is, who understand that the God Emperor built this world from something that belongs to someone else. And Tony has to fight a war in a world where his own existence is the question, against the version of himself that chose differently. And that is the identity war. So let's go back to the snap. If you were in the theater in 2019, you probably felt it somewhere in your chest in a way that's hard to explain to someone who wasn't there. Thanos looking at Tony as the power of the Infinity Stones surged through his suit of armor. Tony looks at him and says 4 final words: "I am Iron Man." Now, I want you to watch that scene again with everything we built across this series sitting in the back of your mind, because Tony has just come back from Battleworld. He fought a war in a world where nobody knew his name, where his face was the God Emperor's face, where Victor Von Doom took everything He Remains built and used it to rule instead of to serve. Tony has seen it. He's lived inside it. He's fought through it. And then Loki brings him back to Endgame. And I want you to remember something Tony said earlier in Endgame when Steve shows up at the lake house and asks him to come back. Tony says he hopes they can bring back what they lost, but he has to keep what he has. That condition is the thing that separates these two men more than any power, any armor, any cosmic force in the Marvel Universe. Because Victor Von Doom had nothing left to keep. The experiment took it. The grief took it. And without something real to hold on to, without a family, without a reason that had nothing to do with the mission, the love collapsed inward. A God Emperor ruling a world built from someone else's face with no one left who knows his real name. Doom built a world because he had nothing left to come home to. Tony came back from Battleworld because he did. And when he wields those stones, he's declaring that he is a man who knows exactly what he's trying to fight for. I am Iron Man. So that's season 1 of the Doomsday Clock. 10 videos, 1 arc, nature versus nurture. 2 men built from the same material who arrived at completely different destinations. And one of them, at the end of everything, going home. Now, I want to say something to the people who have been here since the beginning, since the Iron Man video, since I went from a small channel with 160 subs all the way up to where we are now. You guys are the reason this series exists in the form it does. The discussions made it better, the questions made it deeper, and honestly, the fact that people cared enough to argue about this theory is the whole point. That's what Marvel used to do to us. It made us care enough to argue, to speculate, to have theories of our own. And I think it's starting to do that again. So we're taking a few weeks away from the Doomsday Clock because July belongs to Spider-Man. Brand new month starts July 2nd. 5 weeks of Spider-Man content. Brand new day, the theories, the connections, everything I've been wanting to dig into since that first trailer dropped. That's coming. And then in August, the Doomsday Clock comes back. Season 2, we go deeper, we get closer to December, and I think by the time Avengers Doomsday actually hits, the people who have been watching this series are going to be sitting in that theater watching a completely different movie than everyone else around them. And that's always been the goal. Thank you so much, everybody, and I'll see you on July 2nd.